He's saying he is not going to enforce federal immigration law, that it doesn't matter to him what laws Congress passes, that he's just going to decree his own policies. That's really a dangerous, dangerous threshold the president's crossing. You know, he has a very strange view of how our constitutional system works, which is he demands the policy he wants. And if Congress disagrees with him, he says, well, I'm going to enact it anyway. Yes, he should work with Congress. We should compromise. You know, there's a lot of middle ground on immigration. The framers in the Federalist Papers, they talked about the dangers of a president taking on the powers of monarchy. Correct. And the Constitution gave checks and balances to Congress. It is dangerous, and it should scare anybody who's concerned about individual liberty. Look, to all the liberals, and you may have a few liberals watching this show.
We have a lot.
To all the liberals who say, I like this policy, I would suggest to you, what do you think about the next president? You know, Scripture tells us there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph and his children. There'll be another president. And maybe it's a president whose policy views you don't agree with. If the president has the ability to announce, I'm not going to enforce federal immigration laws because I disagree with him, and the president has the same power to say, I'm not going to enforce tax laws or labor laws or environmental laws. That's dangerous. It's why we have a constitution.
We are unfortunately witnessing a constitutional crisis. What President Obama is doing is he is defying the law. He's defying the Constitution. If the president goes forward with this, if he goes forward unilaterally defying the Congress elected by the people, defying the American voters, then it's incumbent on Republicans in Congress to use every single constitutional tool we have to defend the rule of law, to rein in a president so that the president does not become an unaccountable monarch imposing his own policies in defiance of the American people. This is a moment of testing, and I am hopeful we will see Republicans in Congress stand up and side with the people against a lawless president. You know, the founding of our country, our framers were familiar with a monarchy. They were familiar with a despotic king. And we fought a revolution to be free from King George, to have the rights of the people protected by a Constitution, protected by a Congress. And if you read the Federalist Papers, they talked about the dangers of a despotic executive that rules by fiat. The president is behaving in an unprecedented way. There is not, in recent times, any parallel for a president repudiated by the voters standing up and essentially telling the voters, go jump in a lake, he's going to force his powers.
You know, the White House came...
Congress should do is we should use the constitutional authority that we are given as checks and balances to rein in a despotic executive.
Okay,
and the truth is we need to use the power of the purse, the most potent power Congress has. When we come back in January with a new Congress, we need to systematically pass appropriations legislation, funding the Department of Defense, funding the VA, funding one department after another, and then once the vital functions are funded, we need to pass appropriations with riders specifically limiting the power of the Congress and the power of the president. A presidential temper tantrum is not a rational response. What the Constitution requires, if you want to change immigration law, and I think we need common sense immigration reform, the way to do it is the president has to work with Congress. Yeah. You have to compromise. You have to reach a middle ground. This president doesn't want to do that.
Repeatedly.
The Constitution gives Congress the authority to establish our immigration laws. And what the president announced this week is a wholesale refusal to follow our immigration laws, to enforce our immigration laws. Is a stunning and sad display of a president declining to honor his constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Well, I want to...
This is not a president who wants to work with Congress. Rather, this is a president who is openly defying Congress. And you know, Chris, I actually can't put it any better than Saturday Night Live put it last night, where they reprised the old Schoolhouse Rock. You remember how a bill becomes a law? And Saturday Night Live literally had the president pushing the bill down the steps of the Capitol.
President Obama, what's the big idea? That bill was trying to become a law.
I realize that. But you know, son, there's actually an even easier way to get things done around here. It's called an executive order.
I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happened.
Because we no longer need the steps in the Constitution for how we pass laws, because the president now is claiming unilateral authority the Constitution doesn't give him. And I'll tell you the danger of that, Chris. It's not just on the substance here, and the substance here is very damaging to working men and women across this country, but it's a far broader danger for anyone concerned about liberty. Because if this president can impose his own immigration laws unilaterally, then the next president can impose his own laws, whether it's immigration, whether it's tax, whether it's labor, whether it's environmental. We stop having a constitutional system of checks and balances that's protected our liberty, and we move just to unilateral executive authority. Essentially, using the president's own word, it's the power of a monarch or an emperor. What I'm saying is we should use the constitutional checks and balances we have to rein in the executive. You know, if you read the Federalist Papers, our framers talked about a president that would behave like a monarch, that would rule by diktat and decree rather than following the Constitution.
Sir, I understand that.
Accordingly, I raise a constitutional point of order against Division L of the pending House amendment on the grounds that it violates the following provisions of the Constitution: the separation of powers embodied in the vesting clauses of Article 1, Section 1 and Article 2, Section 1, the enumerated powers of Congress stated in Article 1, Section 8, and the requirement
Let him do this. Okay, go ahead.
And the requirement that the President take care that the laws be faithfully executed as stated in Article 2, Section 3. It is incumbent on this body to resolve those constitutional questions and to honor and protect the constitutional authority of the United States Congress. We should consider the constitutionality of his actions. Every senator in this body should be put on record whether he or she believes it is constitutional for a president to disregard, to ignore federal immigration laws. This president believes he can unilaterally alter laws he disagrees with. Now, there is a form of government where one man or one woman can make the laws, can change the laws, can enforce the laws. That's called a monarchy. There are countries on earth right now that have monarchies that vest the legislative and executive power in one person. And I would note, as Americans historically, we are not unfamiliar with monarchy. We fought a bloody revolution to free ourselves from a tyrannical monarch. And the Constitution, when our framers drafted it, was designed, as Thomas Jefferson put it, to serve as chains to bind the mischief of government. The danger we are facing here right now is profound insofar as it concerns amnesty, and is even greater as it concerns the checks and balances in our government and the protection of individual liberty. Because a president who can set aside the law, who can pick and choose which law to follow and which law to ignore, is no longer a president. That should concern all 100 senators here. Because you know what? If President Obama can decide, I don't agree with the immigration laws, so I will not enforce them, I'll unilaterally change them, Mr. President, I promise you, there's going to come another president with different policy views, and the next time, it may not be immigration laws that he or she is changing. It may be tax laws or environmental laws or labor laws. Now, I fervently believe we need tax reform and labor reform and environmental reform, but there's a proper way to do it. The proper way to do it is this body debating and making legislative changes to the laws, not one president by diktat setting aside the law. A presidential temper tantrum is not an acceptable means of discourse. You know, one of the characteristics of a monarch is he or she need not compromise. The president has justified this illegal amnesty by saying he told Congress what he wanted, and Congress refused to give it to him. Well, Mr. President, the relationship in our constitutional republic between the president and the Congress is not the relationship between a parent and a child. The president does not get to demand of Congress, here is the policy I want, either give me what I want
or I will decree it to be so and ignore the law. That is the president's bargaining position. The president wants to reform immigration, and let me be clear. We need common sense immigration reform. I support common sense immigration reform. But the way it works in our constitutional system, if you want to change the laws, you have to work with the other branches, and that means you have to compromise. It means the president doesn't get everything he wants, and this is a president who is barely willing even to talk to Congress, much less to compromise on anything. As Alexander Hamilton explained in Federalist 69, a monarch decrees, dictates, and rules through fiat, which is what President Obama is attempting to do right now. And when the president embraces the tactics of a monarch, it becomes incumbent on Congress to wield the constitutional power this body has as the elected people's representatives to stop it. Congress, representing the voice of the people who just spoke resoundingly in an election, should use every constitutional tool available to prevent the president from subverting the rule of law. When the president usurps the legislative powers and defies the limits of his authority, it becomes all the more imperative for Congress to act. And Congress should use those powers given to it by the Constitution to counter a lawless executive branch, or this body will lose its authority. If the president will not respect the people, Congress must.